In high school coaching, a lot of the good stories come after the game. Sit back, watch, and listen to the journeys to the sideline and the stories of high school coaches. After the Game, presented by Baker Sports and High School 912.
Welcome to After the Game. I'm Josh Baker, along with my co-host Hall of Famer Coach Kevin Sullivan. Coach, how you doing today?
Doing great. Looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we got a friend of ours on today. Coach Bobby Ramsay from Andrew Jackson joins us. Coach, how you doing today?
Good. Appreciate y'all having me. Looking forward to being here.
All right, I'll go ahead and get it out of the way so we can mention the man that brought all three of us together. Marty Lee, there's your shout out.
Marty Lee, there you go, Marty Lee.
Now we can move on.
All right, all right. Give us 15. We'll 15 minutes there. There you go.
So, Coach, grew up playing football in Texas. Played high school football in Texas.
I did. We bounced around when I was growing up. Everybody thinks we were military, but I said no. My dad was in higher education. He was a community college president. That's usually a conversation stopper. People but he was moving up the ladder. The family was originally from the Philadelphia area, but he got out of education, got back in. And when he had to go where the job was, so that was Kansas. So I was actually born in Kansas. I don't remember much about it. My mother doesn't speak fondly of it. And then we moved to Florida, spent time down here. Parents actually bought a little a vacation place, on Fernandina.
Okay.
And they kept it when we moved to Jersey. We moved back to the Jersey, Philly area until I was 14. And then he got a job in San Antonio as the head of a district. So we moved down there and, started playing football down there and got the whole Texas high school Friday Night Lights experience.
Now, does that San Antonio area, is it Texas football? Is it like?
Oh yeah, I think, the Dallas area and the Houston area, the two that are going to produce the most talent, and probably East Texas. As far as the atmosphere and everything you get, it doesn't produce as much talent as those other areas, but you still get the experience of it.
It's still a priority for the community.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And so you get that Friday Night Light experience, and it was a blast. And then I played at a small college after that in Abilene, Texas, for 4 years. So, and I'd been a city. Not that Abilene's a small town, but I'd been. My dad grew up in a row home in North Philadelphia, East Philadelphia. So I'm a city guy. So it was the first time I was really out, and a lot of my buddies came from small towns in West Texas and East Texas. So I'm learning about things that I'd never experienced before. But even when we moved to Texas, I always tell people moving to San Antonio was like moving to Mars.
Right.
We were 14 years old, and I had the Jersey accent. I talk like this, and, people are talking about like their ranches and Wranglers and listening to, like, y'all listen to, my dad listens to, I would like tell people back up there, like, they listen to country music, like high school kids. Like, it's so weird. Like, so it was definitely an adjustment. But once I got adjusted, it was great.
Yeah. So at what point during all that did you know that you wanted to coach?
I didn't. I went to college. All my buddies, because it was a school that produced a lot of teacher coaches, and most of them were all wanting to do that. And I was like, I'm not going to coach. I didn't have anything. I didn't know what I was going to do. I knew I was going to go to graduate school, but I wasn't like, dead set on coaching or anything like that. And when I was getting ready to leave, my defensive coordinator our senior year had been a GA at Florida State in the mid 80s. And he said, when you go out to Florida, he said, if you want to coach on the side to make some extra money, he said, you can do it. And in Texas, you got to be a teacher. Right. So I was like, okay. So I sent some resumes out. I didn't know anything about any of the high schools in Tallahassee. And I got responses from Godby and Lincoln. And so I ended up talking to David Wilson. Right. This is still when, the internet's around, but it's certainly not like it is now. So I just go on Google Tallahassee Lincoln. And there's a USA Today preseason poll that has them ranked number 3 in the nation. And I was like, in the world is, the two in front of them were De La Salle, who was in the middle of that million-game winning streak, and then Long Beach Poly when they had Mercedes Lewis. So I get out there, and I came out a week before practice started to sit in on the meetings, and right away, just like sitting in the meetings was cool, hearing them talk about the players and stuff like that. And then when I got out on the grass with the players, I just realized how much I just love being a part. I just love being a part of the team, and just being around the guys, and just being around football, just the smell of football, the experience of it. And as I got into grad school, a lot of the classes, a lot of the subjects I thought it was going to be a bunch of ex-jocks, and we were going to kind of all be talking about our sports careers, and it really wasn't like that. You know, I didn't want to sell tickets. I didn't want to do marketing. I didn't want to do facilities. I really wanted to be involved with the on-field product and be around the players. So, you know, I always tell people sometimes you find out what you want to do, but find out what you don't want to do. So, and it didn't hurt that we won a state title, so that was nice too.
Yeah,
so,
year one, Coach.
Yeah,
year one, fresh out of college.
I'd have been done. All right,
I
let's
should
get
have
on.
dropped the mic. But I mean, that team was special. I mean, Antonio Cromartie didn't even start in secondary. He started on offense and he played a lot. I don't mean to say like, but
right.
I mean, we had 4 major Division I defensive backs, and
Pat
in fact, we were
Pat Watkins,
it was Pat Watkins, Greg Threet, Ryan Gilliam,
Greg Threet was a stud.
Gavin Dickey was a special high school football player.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Derrick's the greatest I've ever seen, but I say that with always like a caveat. I'm back in my mind, like, man, but Gavin was really, really like I really loved to have seen what if he would have played football, you know, and had all that George O'Leary stuff not happened, he might had, because you remember like Joe Hamilton, the quarterback they had, he was really kind of out of that mold, and they recruited him hard at Georgia Tech. Well, then O'Leary gets the Notre Dame job, and Gavin goes on this visit, and it's phenomenal, and like, okay, he's going to go to Notre Dame, and he's going to fit that offense to a T. Well, then the resume thing happened,
right,
and O'Leary got let go. And then he ended up signing at Florida, and I'm pretty sure at that point Spurrier knew he already had one foot out the door, because that's when he left to go to Washington. So, I had that year, and you know, wanted to give college a shot and sent some resumes out, and just ended up back in San Antonio, ironically at a small college. But you know, we went to the Stag Bowl that year. So my first 2 years, it's, you know, state championship and national championship. We lost to Mount Union, which everybody does.
Everybody did, but hey.
But that team was like loaded with coaches. Like, it's crazy. That team had like Nick Sirianni was one of the receivers. Matt Campbell was one of their defensive ends. Like, the guy who's the head coach at Toledo was on that team. I look back on the roster, there's like 6 or 7 guys who are all like big time coaches now. Like,
that's crazy.
And they're good enough players to beat us pretty bad. So, and you know, I did 3 years of that and I enjoyed it, but just kind of had a mentor who sort of recommended that, you know, maybe high school would be the better route to go. And, you know, I mean, Coach, you know how it is, and you gotta be with the right guy at the right time to make the move. Right. And it just wasn't a place where guys were moving around. Everybody who was there was kind of there. So, you know, I just kind of took a leap of faith and had some family in this area, and sent some resumes. And second Marty Lee reference, ended up at First Coast, the coach. So that brought me out to this area. Yeah.
Brought you to the area and moved up that staff pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, I was there 3 years.
What year did you go?
I got there at 05.
05,
so I was there 05 to 07. You know, during the height of the Sullivan run at Jackson, I think. But, you know, and then Yulee opened up, and, you know, I just went through the process and ended up getting the job. And, you know, I got a head job at an early age, but I don't know that I would have had that had I not had the experiences that I had at the 3 places I was before. Mm-hmm. You know, I would tell any young coach, everybody wants to be a coordinator at 23 or 24. I think it's better to go places where you can learn and get that experience to move up. I think that helps you move up faster than if you get a position you're not ready for at a young age. So, you know, Yulee was in its second year, and, you know, I went in and thought I had all the answers and realized pretty quick that, you know, I certainly didn't, and it was going to be a much different experience than anything else I'd done before.
And that's been a theme on the podcast, right? Going from the assistant, especially, I mean, when you came from 2 very, you know, successful high school, successful college, and Marty, who'd been doing it a long time.
Right.
So you had some guys that were established, and then boom, you're out on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I always remember the first team meeting. I walked in, and you know, and again, like you said, I'd been fortunate to be around some really talented, you know, as a coach, a lot of really talented athletes. And I walk into my first meeting, and I was like, can you guys move so the regular players can come in? Where's the varsity at? They're like, no, this is it. I was like, oh, boy. You know, it was one of those kind of like fight or flight moments. But, you know, it was definitely you know, again, this is going to be a different experience. You know, and people always talk about Derrick, but I had no idea who Derrick Henry was when I took the job.
Right.
You know, I started hearing about him a little bit after I got it, but I had never seen him. He was in the 7th grade, and you know, our running backs coach Pat Dunlap had this real gruff voice, and he had coached down there at the middle school, and you know, it was, you know, that first off season was just a series of like ups and downs and just days where you felt like we're getting somewhere, and you know, and then days where you're like, oh my gosh, I win the game. And whenever I would get down, he would say, "Oh, we're gonna get Derrick up here in a year. We'll be all right." I'm like, "Oh, that's cute. There's some little 7th grader down there. Like, we're Mike 0-10 with this team, man." Like, and then I saw Derrick, and I was like, "All right, well,
I get it.
Okay, let's get through that first year, and maybe we got a chance."
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was so. I saw him the first time in the spring, and they were out there on the fields. They're right next to each other, middle school and high school. And as I'm driving out, they were all like lined up across the 30-yard line, and it was like 5'6", 5'4", 5'6", 5'3". I was like, "Oh, that's Derrick." All right, yeah, let's just get through this first year, and we ended up going okay. I mean, we broke even, but I was like, yeah, there's somebody we could build a program around.
Yeah.
And then watched him as an 8th grader, and it was,
Yeah.
it was what it was. So
He averaged 5 touchdowns a game. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it
wasn't 5 yards a carry. It was 5 touchdowns.
It was funny. Like, they played with the junior ball, and he couldn't cover it all the way. So when he would start running, it would fall out when he would start to sweat. So we'd like have to stop and bend over and pick up the ball, and the kids were chasing, and they'd stop me like, and then you just pick up the ball and keep running. I was like, I've never seen anything like this.
Yeah, you could see it early.
Oh yeah,
I saw him. I remember seeing him in a middle school game in 7th grade, and it was like, oh my, this is. We've talked about Seattle. We had C4, right?
Yep.
And it was that, but at a different level. Because the competition he was playing wasn't what Seattle was playing as well.
Right. And when he came in the 9th grade, it was like, even though we had expectations he would be good, and certainly, we were a 4th-year school at the time when he got there. So I mean, that was our first senior class, and so obviously if you're going to come in and play as a young kid, pretty good opportunity because we hadn't been around that long. And the first day in full pads, this is back when 2-a-days still happens. You say that nowadays.
What?
We used to practice twice a day, man. And we were doing inside run, and we run ISO, and we had 3 pretty good high school defensive linemen, and we don't block any of them. And like, they get through the line of scrimmage. One kind of gets them here, one gets them here, one gets them here. And I always say it was kind of like watching like Optimus Prime, like going down in a fight, like, wah, wah, wah. I never saw him get tackled in middle school, so I'm thinking, oh goodness, he's gonna get up, he's gonna throw the ball, he's gonna throw a fit, and he just put it down and went back to the huddle. I'm like, all right, we made it through that one, and we ran the same play again, and he busted through, and our offensive coordinator was a guy named Charles Richards, and a big man, had been a backup quarterback in the NFL in the 70s, and he's standing next to me, and he kind of looks down at me, and I looked up at him, I was like, well, I think we found our tailback, so let's go from there. Right. So from that point on, I mean, he was the guy, and we never thought anything of it.
How was it managing him? I mean, because as he went on, he became a little bit of a rock star.
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, I always equated it to like the Jackson 5, and he was Michael. First 3 years it was Michael and the Jackson 5, and senior year it was Michael when Thriller came out.
Right.
Managing him wasn't that hard. Early on, I wanted to make sure, because I'm not an offensive guy, and I just was like, look, I'm not going to impact him as much teaching him how to play running back other than don't fumble the ball. But making sure that all the intangible pieces were lined up, he's going to have strong character, strong work ethic. And he came in at a time when some of the other kids who came into the program were gym rats, and he gravitated towards them. And they also had some dads who were around the program who would, sort of encourage him to get into the way. So he went that direction with it. So it wasn't, I always called him a low maintenance superstar. The dynamics that came around him were the trickier ones, and Coach can attest to that. When you have a great player like that, the behind the scenes dynamics are the ones that are really hard to manage. You have, number one, you have just a lot of jealousy, and everybody looks back now with fond memories, and everybody's really happy with him. But I'm like, okay, some of y'all, especially, the parents of the kids who were, a year above him and, a year behind him, like, they weren't necessarily in love,
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't worship Derrick. I mean, I was hard on him, especially in front of the team, because one, I didn't know he was going to play for Nick Saban, but I don't ever want a kid to leave and not ever have been held accountable, because you're not going to make it. But then also I wanted them to see, hell, if we yell at Henry, he'll dang sure yell at me. So, but, those dynamics come into play, managing everything with the media, with the recruiting. That was right at a time, too, when a lot of the websites were really starting to blow up, and Rivals was getting huge, and Max Preps was getting big,
and the Stars meant something.
The Stars and the social media was Twitter was blowing up. So all those dynamics were, and then you felt the pressure to obviously win because you had a guy that you were expected to win with, and our schedule was, we were in a small district. His junior and senior year, we were in a 3-team district, so we had to schedule 8 games. And I always tell people that was like calling selling cancer, and and the only teams that really wanted to play you were with the First Coast when they were on a run, Trinity Christian, Buford, Gainesville when they went to state, teams who were like, okay, well, he may get 250, but we're going to win the game, type deal. So you had all those elements in play. So you had to, and as a coach, you had to discipline yourself to keep the focus on the team. You couldn't make it just about, he made that easy because he didn't cause us many problems, or any of that I really recall that were big. But you had to keep your focus there on the group as a whole because, as great as he was, I mean, you got to have, you can't just win with one guy.
Right.
And so that part of it was definitely challenging, and his freshman year, again, social media hadn't really taken off yet. Like if he was to do if it was now, everybody would have already seen him. But his 9th grade year, it was because Yulee's still north of Jackson. I mean, and so it's people would. I heard about this kid up there. You know what I'm saying? And even his 10th grade year to a certain extent. So when you were scheduling games, there'd be a team that might be interested in playing you, and his coach like, well, we'll call on the phone and. Then we'll seal the deal tomorrow.
Right.
Just talk to your AD or whatever. And then you call back the next day, and the guy's like, "Yeah, gosh, my ADs, we guys are just a little bit too far away." I'm like, "Well, we didn't just pick up and move 50 miles north." I'm like, "I think you probably." This is before everybody, I guess, had smartphones. Googled Derrick Henry Yulee and was like, I think we're going to pass. So
we don't know part of that.
Yeah, we don't want any part of that. So, so those were tricky dynamics and. There were definitely some peaks and valleys as far as different times in his career. But his senior year was obviously, committing to Alabama, the ESPN game, and then when he broke the national record, which that was, we really didn't think that was going to happen until late in the season. I think people thought we had like this Henry tracker, like we would move along, like, oh, he's close. We didn't think it was going to happen. And then we had beaten West Nassau and you had a big game and we had 2 more games left in the regular season. And we knew we had a third at least because we had won the district. So I'm just playing around doing the math on my phone on the way home and subtracted where he was from that total. And I got like 700 and I was like, oh goodness. It's like, he's going to do it, So, and then I was talking about it with some of my guys at Jackson. They were talking about the game. And, of course, I mean, he had the 500-yard game against them that year. And,
not me.
Yeah, no.
We were gone. We played him at Atlantic Coast and held him under 300 yards because he cramped up and missed 4 series in the third quarter. So felt pretty good about it.
But, we so that had been big. And then, I was telling the guys, I said, look, then – he's going to break the record that night, but you got to win that game too. Like I'm like, we cannot, we can't break the record and he gets beat. We get beat. So fortunately we advanced to the semifinals that year. But it was good time, not just because of everything that happened, but the people that you did it with.
Right.
The coaches that you were with, the players that were there. There were a lot of us that got to have a lot of real special experience. Certainly he played a big role in that, but, it's really looking back on just those times, like just with him as he was developing. I mean, one of the funnest times I had remember was just when the quarterback club used to give out the Player of the Week award, and I was driving him down to it and he was a 9th grader and we just talked about football. We were talking about like bigger running backs. Like I was telling him about like Eric Dickerson and, I didn't really see Tony Dorsett play, but, like just Eddie George and, his interest in that and everything. So, those are the times you kind of remember as really the kind of more special times, when it's just the two of you. Because we spent a lot of time together just because we had to.
One of the things that's always impressed me about Derrick as the years have gone on is just as big of a God-gifted athlete as I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And
No
to
doubt.
then still fall in love with the weight room.
Right.
You know,
Right.
when was that a high school deal or was that a college deal?
That was high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. He. No, I didn't like to do. He didn't like to do the jerks on clean and jerk. He put 315 up one time and dropped it and almost hit him. And so he was kind of like scarred from that. But that was a high school thing. You know, he just loved to work out, and it just kind of grew. Again, we had guys who came into the program who he gravitated towards, and they were this crew that you could always count on. You know, we in college, going into my senior off season or my junior off season, going into my senior year, we worked out in the mornings, and on Wednesdays we pushed trucks and pulled tires, and we would, you know, the coach would put the truck in neutral, and 3 guys would push it 50, and they just kind of. And I always said, like, if I'm ever head coach, we're going to do that. So we did that because Yulee had a concrete track, and you know, Yulee's got some trucks, so it all made sense. So we would go kind of do it the same way. Well, one time his group just decided we're going to push it all the way around the entire 400 meters.
Right.
And then it became a thing where, like, so now we're pushing, which I wouldn't advocate. I mean, I was just kind of let it happen, whatever. But then, like, the news finds out about it and shows up, and Yulee's pushing trucks around. Derrick Henry's pushing the truck around he had some other guys with him. But,
Right.
But yeah, and then it obviously accelerated, I think, once he got to Alabama and everything. But there were some things he wasn't good at. Like, I remember when he was the first time he ever did the 5-10-5, the shuttle drill. He couldn't put his foot in the ground. He could not change direction. Like, he just kept sliding and sliding and sliding. And he probably cut a path about the size of this table into the grass from just missing it so many times. Well, then 2 years later, he's going up to the opening in Oregon and winning the, you know, just stuff like that. And, you know, catching the ball. I mean, you know, I was like, always joked, like, kind of look, people are like, why didn't you throw it to him? I was like, well, it's a lot easier just to hand it to him.
Right.
But I'm like,
We were throwing toss.
yeah. We pitched it to him. You know, I was like, well, because he kind of looked like Edward Scissorhands going to catch the ball. But, you know, now, you know, he got to college and the pros, not that he catches it a ton, but, you know, he got away from being the kid who's like, I'm really good at a lot of these things, so I don't have to work on these things I'm not very good at. And as he matured and developed, it was, I got to work on everything.
Right.
You know, when he got to college, he wasn't a very good pass protector, and that was something everybody kind of knocked him on. And I was like, well, yeah. We didn't do a lot of blitz pickup with him because pass plays were kind of his play on, you know, like that was his kind of time to rest. But, you know, I figured, you know what, he'll figure it out. Like, he's plenty big enough to step in front of a linebacker once they teach him how to do it. So, but those kind of things to where he wasn't good at, but he put the time in to get good at them. Because I think he knew, like, if I don't get good at this stuff, I don't care how talented I am with the ball, I'm not going to get on the field. And we talked about that before we went to Alabama. I said, look, if, you know, the running backs coach walks into the meeting on Friday and says, Coach Saban, Henry's going to get our quarterback killed, you won't go in the game.
Right.
You know, I'll never forget his first snap was against West Virginia, and McCarron's checked the protection to slide opposite direction. Well, Derrick went with the slide, which left backside guy free, and he has to run and throw the ball away. And they put the camera on him, and you can see him. I may be leaving out a word or two, but it was essentially he doesn't know what he's doing.
Right.
He didn't go back in the game. So, you know, I think those things where he was certainly smart enough to know, like, I got to get good at this stuff too, because if not, I'm not going to play. Right. You know, it doesn't matter how good of a running back I am. So, you know, I always thought that was impressive. But, you know, we had a lot of kids during that time who I saw this past weekend. I mean, you know, we had a kid, Bryson Gagnon, who went to Southwest Baptist, and they had been terrible at Division II team Minnesota. I mean, he helped change that program. They won the conference championship, went to the playoffs. Kid Zach Camp, heck of a player, you know, went to Huntington College. Yeah, three years conference champs. Dane Cruz, our middle linebacker, goes to Charleston Southern. You know, they went to the quarter. I mean, Charleston Southern is not normally a powerhouse in FCS. That his junior year, they went to the quarterfinal. And I remember that Friday night in New York when Derrick's about to get the Heisman, I was sitting in my hotel room, and they were playing Jacksonville State. So it's like, I'm here to see Derrick get the Heisman, and I'm watching one of my other guys, the furthest his team's ever gone in the playoffs. So, you know, there were a lot of special times there for sure with a lot of different special players.
Yeah, I mean, after the Derrick years at Yulee, I mean, how hard was it to keep the community involved? To keep, you know, because the once in a lifetime guy just left.
Yeah, you know, there was. I'm not going to say there wasn't an element. I wasn't certainly glad to lose him. But there was kind of an element of like, all right, we kind of get back to being somewhat normal, you know, like, you know, then when you don't have a guy running for 250 yards every night, you're like, yep, so, because your perspective is so warped, you know, like after a game when you'd come in and like, what do you get? 227, like, huh? You know, Peacock was a good back. I think he went over 200 a couple times, but I mean, so in the 12 years since I've coached, I've had one kid go over 200 like twice, where it was the norm with him. So, you know, your perspective becomes more realistic again. You're like, okay, what is good is now not what it. You know, you have to change your process some as far as your thinking goes. I think the community. There were, quite frankly, a lot of people who were kind of, you know, that group after he graduated. One thing I learned, you know, in that process of losing a guy like him was you better be careful the next year because there's a lot of kids who feel like they haven't had the spotlight on them. Right. And now they think this is their time. And you better be careful because they're going to really try to make up for all the time that they lost because of having a kid like him. Right. And, you know, we ended up having a winning season, but there was a lot of dynamics that took place that I hadn't anticipated, and I kind of learned from, you know, that, you know, you have to be ready for that because that next group is kind of chomping at the bit to get theirs. And, you know, we did have some issues there, I think, with that team in 13 a little bit with some of those guys and some of the older parents or some of the parents in that group because, you know, they, you know, they would say like, well, your golden boy's gone now. So, which I mean, whatever, but it at the same time too, it gave you an opportunity to develop a new group of players and, you know, and grow a new group. So, I mean, you've been there for sure, you know? So, I think I learned a lot that next year about how you transition out of, you can say all you want, you're going to do things the same and you're just going to continue, you know, but I learned that really is just kind of talk. And college guys can say that because they can maybe go out and recruit the next guy. But you got to play with what's there. So I think going into 14, we all had a much better idea of how we needed to transition, you know, just overall out of that era. And I think those last 3 years were a lot more fun. You know, 13 was definitely, again, a successful year on the field, I think. But, you know, we went through a lot of drama that, you know, I learned a lot from that for sure.
Yeah.
You know.
So you feel like the time at Yulee, you've had Derrick, you've transitioned from there, you kind of got past it. Now it's time for a new challenge. Right?
Yeah, you know, we had good teams. We had winning seasons. The last year there, we went to the playoffs, and Ponte Vedra had that really strong team with Tronny and those guys. And I mean, they almost won it all. And, you know, they hammered us pretty good in the first round. And, you know, it kind of felt like, you know, we had gotten back to the postseason. You know, that had been our goal. And I just kind of felt like I'd done all I could do. Yeah. You know, like it was time. You know, that maybe there was a place out there where I could accomplish some goals that I had that I maybe couldn't at Yulee at the time. And, you know, I'd done all I could do, and it was time for somebody else to have the opportunity. So that's really what motivated, you know, the possibility, you know, ultimately going to Mandarin and you know, why I decided to. I think in coaching, you know, you always kind of have to ask yourself, is there more of a challenge here, or do I need to try to find a place where, you know, I can go in and maybe make the impact that I'm not making here because I've kind of just, you know, going a certain way at this point.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the Mandarin years, we got to take a little break. So more with Coach Ramsay when we come back from after the game.
You're going to win going away. Play confident, play aggressive, play smart, play for each other, play for that Mandarin on your chest. You understand? Yes, sir.
Baker Sports is local sports. Uniforms from Pop Warner and Little League to travel ball, high school, and college. They make you look good. They help you play good. Baker Sports has been helping families make memories that will last a lifetime with their Baker's Buckets. We've got a lot of these filled with baseballs and softballs in the garage. I've been throwing batting practice to Ty and Kaylee for years, and also sit on the Baker's Bucket, catching Kaylee while she practices her pitching. Yeah! Baker Sports is homegrown, and a lot of employees that used to play on local ball fields now work for Baker Sports, now helping you look good, play good, and make memories of your own. Visit Bakersport.com to see what Baker Sports can do for you. Custom apparel, Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, embroidery, screen printing, and more. Baker Sports is local sports from Jacksonville to anywhere in the Southeast. Bakersport.com. In high school coaching, a lot of the good stories come after the game. Sit back, watch, and listen to the journeys to the sideline and the stories of high school coaches. After the Game, presented by Baker Sports and High School 912.
Welcome back to After the Game here with Coach Ramsay. Just transition from Yulee, get the Mandarin job, move across town, different county, different expectations, completely different world.
Right. Yeah, it was one thing I realized, going to Mandarin, I think one good thing was I did feel like that football was a little bit more important to those kids in general, I think they competed a little bit more against just more competition. I mean, being at a bigger school, coming up in bigger schools, being in Jacksonville, I was impressed by that. But, walked in June when I got the job and, realized pretty quick that, Braddock had been gone a year and a lot had changed, and so getting it back, because I kind of thought like, you walk in and, a lot of these kids played for Braddock and they'll get back. And it was like, no, it was not, it was again another learning experience because, we just, just really were, trying to rein everything back in and get it back on track. What was important and what they valued wasn't really what it needed to be. There was a lot of, just not really understanding the detail piece matters, being on time, being there every day, having the right attitude, having the right work ethic. And that combined with the schedule that they had put together, which was just a monster. I mean, we had Godby, we had, when they were rolling, we had Apopka, we had, Rains, we had Lee/Riverside, in the district with Sandalwood and Flagler and all. I mean, it was really the biggest change I saw when I got there on the field was between, 5A and 8A at the time was every week was tough.
Right.
There was really no week where there were very few games when I was at Mandarin where we were just chilling in the fourth quarter, trying to get everybody in because we had the game in hand. I mean, and I learned the first year, like, the staffs are deeper. These teams have, better organized off-season programs. And, a lot of, at a certain point, halfway through the year, when, you recognize that we weren't going to be a postseason team and whatnot, you start thinking about next year and, okay, what do we have to do to get this thing, and then you really start looking at the other highly successful programs and how are we going to emulate them and what are some things that we need to do differently in order to make that happen. And one of them was, when you looked at like Apopka and Manatee and some of these places, one thing I noticed was that they outsourced their strength program. They went out and they found pros to come in and really run the thing. And we couldn't necessarily do that, but what we could do, was go out and find somebody to help us put it together, who had more expertise. And I've always been a weight room guy, but I also recognize that we need to do some things differently here. And so I was fortunate to find a guy named Joe Hansen who really helped me put it together. And that's really where it all started. And I think the good thing about having a 2-8 year the first year was, I came in and I kind of tried to keep it together the way it had been going, and that was a mistake. And it was, but in a sense, it was good because I could say, okay, guys, y'all's way didn't work. Try my way. It's like in a Days of Thunder when he's tearing up his tires, and then he's like, his way, my way. I was 6 seconds faster. So, you had some credibility now with the kids because the year didn't go very well, and y'all's way didn't work. So why don't we try it our way and see how it goes? And then, brought Toby into the program, some other coaches, Jermaine Wilson, who's now the head coach at Wolfson. And nothing against the guys that had been there before, but I just felt like we needed more guys that knew what it meant to be a high school football coach. I mean, my defensive coordinator would go on to coach the defensive line for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was Marco Coleman, playing great guy, great coach. But, much better in that element, than with 16 and 17-year-olds. I always go back to my first year at Lincoln, the defensive coordinator, Joe Valisi, telling me one of the first things I learned was he said, Bobby, pros see the game here. College guys see the game here. High school kids see the game here. And I started thinking about myself as a player. If you'd asked me when I was 17, Bobby, what's your job on this? I could have told it to you. But, okay, what's the strong safety do? I don't know. Right. Whatever he's supposed to do,
right.
So, and you have to always remember, like, these kids, they're not college guys, they're not pros. You really have to teach from the ground up, and you can't skip a step. So, and I think getting a staff together, guys that understood that, and a group of kids that were hungry to not have a bad year, all that combined to help us transition into a much better 18. But it was still, and then obviously Carson coming in made a major impact. But a lot of people forget, Carson hadn't played a lot of football when he got to us. I mean, he had been a baseball kid,
right?
And
good one,
yeah. I mean, he's committed to Florida,
right.
And his was kind of unique in the sense that, like, his recruitment was ahead of his recruitment was ahead of him on the field.
Right.
Like, that summer, he's going to these camps. He's getting offered by Alabama. He's getting offered by Georgia. He's getting offered by Florida. He was getting offered by Miami and all these people. And you're just, but he hadn't really played, and then he commits to Alabama. I told him not to. He did it. They never listen. Like, I'm going to start telling them, hey, man, when you visit, commit. Because they every time I'm like, don't commit on the. I mean, Derrick committed to Georgia in the 10th grade. I'm like, don't do it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Get a call that night. Coach, he's going to commit. It's just like, so I always joke now after 4 or 5 I'm going to tell him, hey, man, you go on that visit, go ahead and commit, do the opposite of what Ramsay tells you. So
in addition to changing your staff over, knowing what you need to do,
right?
Kids buying into your system,
right.
Carson coming in,
right?
You got married that offseason.
Yeah, got married, moved. I mean, there was a lot of changes. I mean,
yeah.
It was definitely.
Did you feel like all that kind of focused you in more?
I think a lot of things came together,
yeah.
At the right time, no doubt. And I do think it made things off the field much simpler for me. And, that part of my life was in a much, better place. So, yeah, I think looking back at the time, I don't know that I would have said that, but when you question like that, looking back, like, absolutely, being settled in the home, kind of knowing what your future looked like. The personal life piece being different. I look back and I'm like, that made a big difference, than.
At what point did you realize that team was special?
Probably, we were 2-3 at one point,
right?
We had the game at Atlantic Coast, which was like, that was kind of a weird deal because, again, that was kind of like Carson's debut, but nobody really knew, what he was going to play like, and then we had a difficult schedule early. Carson got banged up. We had some dog fights with Godby. Lee was really good. We're playing DeLand and we're 1-2, and they were a strong team that year, and we're down there, and we're down 17-14 with 2 minutes to go. And Carson takes us on this textbook 2-minute drive. I mean, you would take it to a clinic. It was that good. And we won the game. Or maybe we were down 21-17 and we ended up winning 24-21, it might have been. But even the next week we come back and we lose to Reigns. It was another dogfight, tough game. But we're 2-3 going on the road to play Apopka, who had beat us 50-12 the year before. 50-12 makes it sound like it was probably closer than it actually was. And they had Jalen Carter at the time. Fortunately, they hadn't figured out, I don't know why. I'd love to ask Coach Darlington this because I respect him a ton. But Carter played tight end. He didn't, and I was always like, thank goodness this guy doesn't play defense. But he did the next year, and obviously the rest is history. But, we went down there, and we were kind of late getting there. But the kids got off the bus, and as they're running around in pregame, I'm like, they're kind of a good headspace, and okay, it was, this is, and of course we fumbled the opening kickoff, and like, all right, well, that's not where we started. but they just kept putting the ball on the ground. They run that single wing, and that's the one thing about it. All the handoff action that happens, and we jump up 21-7 late. When we won that game, you're thinking, okay, I don't know that you're thinking state championship, but I think we were the first team from Jacksonville to beat Apopka, and because they religiously just came up here and drummed everybody,
right.
Whether it was Fletcher or First Coast, good teams. Mm-hmm. So that clued me in that we had a chance. We still had a lot of tough games in front of us. We still had a loaded Sandalwood team. Flagler, Spruce Creek was always a dogfight. Mm-hmm. And then we lost the last game of the year to Fletcher. So going into the playoffs, I felt good about our team. But as far as state championship, I can honestly say we never once. I don't even think the week of the state championship we said state championship. It never was like that. It really was just, okay, we beat DeLand. When we went down and beat Winter Park like we did, I think that was an eye-opener. So there were kind of I guess I answered that question in phases. Well, there was a hint that we could be special. Oh, it looks like we might be special. When we blew out Winter Park like that down there, it was okay, but then we had to turn around and play Wekiva, who had 7 Division I guys, and Tyrone Davis and Brandon Green, who just got drafted at Florida State and hadn't given up a point in 9 games. So you really don't have time to sort of sit back and talk about how special you think you might be, because you're playing a team. Right. They think the same thing. So, getting past that game, I think we felt like we had a great opportunity to do something special. But even then, after beating Riverview the next week, I always remember the week of the Riverview game. One thing I really give our kids credit for was during that week. Now, they might have talked about it amongst themselves, but not one kid came up to me and was like, "Hey, Coach, when we win, who are we playing the next week?" There was not one mention of it, And even when Columbus came up in the state championship, there was never any I really believe the biggest thing we had going for us is that we were having so much fun, we just wanted to play another week. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would tell anybody, I think the team that just wants to play one more week worse than the other team, if all things are equal, that team is going to win.
Right. Enjoys being with each other.
Yeah. We just were having such a good time. We didn't want it to end. And, we just kind of looked forward to the fact that, we get to practice again, and we get to do this one more week, and we get to stay together. We know it's going to end at some point, but we don't even want to think about that. We don't want it to end. We want it to go as long as it can. So, and then you get down into the state championship game, and that's the one time I think we really embraced the underdog role. Larry Bluestein, I was listening to his radio show, and they were predicting the state titles, and and he was like, "Oh, Mandarin's got no." And I like Bluestein, but he's like, "Mandarin's got no chance. Columbus just on another level." And I'm like, "We don't have a chance." I'm right. I could. Oh, you want to pick against us? Pick against. We don't have a chance. Come on, man. So and again, we get down there and you go through warm-ups and just the coolness of that team, mm-hmm. Guys who just nothing fazed them. And the coaches did such a great job with that. And the sideline, there was just never any when things got tight and there was, you could feel the edge in a game. There was just somebody's going to do something. I don't know who it's going to be, but somebody's going to make a play to win the game. Or they're going to make a decision that they shouldn't make. We're playing Spruce Creek, and it's 34-33. They score. They go for 2 to win the game. They come out in a formation. They come out in the wishbone. They ain't running all night long. Run some play that ends up, like a 6-yard loss. Buddy, I would have told you if you would have ran inside zone again, you would have beat us. Right. Or, so Columbus, it's 37-35, and they're going for 2 to tie the game. And Xavier Henderson had killed us all night. He had just destroyed us. 3 touchdowns. His touchdown made it 37-35. And, if they just would have faded him up one more time, that game would have probably gone to overtime. But they ran a play that they had run one time earlier in the game that had lost 4 yards, and that's the play they ran in that situation, and we ate it up. And I would tell Coach Merritt, Coach, if you would have thrown it to Xavier Henderson one more time, that game probably would have gone to overtime. Now we had time to go down and maybe potentially score, but even at the end after we recovered the onside kick, and it was that, Coach, that netherworld that you hate to be in, where there's just enough time left to where you got to get a first, you got to get a first down, which, you know, that's such a tough position to be in, especially in high school, you know, because, you know, there may come a time where you got to trust your quarterback to do something with the ball. As good as Carson was, you know, that's a scary proposition. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we run a play, we get 2 yards, it's 2nd and 8, and everything had an RPO tag in it. And Chris Mitchell, who's now playing at Notre Dame, and Carson, they gave each other, there was a hand signal. I think it was like this or something, like, or they tug on the towel, basically saying, like, telling Carson and Chris are going, you know, I'm going to pull it and throw it to you. And I thought we had a run on. You know, I heard Toby call the play, and Carson pulls it and throws a slant to Chris for 7 yards. Now it's 3rd and 1. Like, get the first down, he'll sneak it, the game's over. And I was watching the broadcast of the game, and they're like, "Oh, Bobby Ramsey, riverboat gambler," and I'm like, "Yeah, man, that was
RPO."
Yeah. I'm thinking, hey, I had nothing to do with that, but whatever.
Great players make great coaches.
Yeah, and that's the thing about coaching guys like that is, and Coach will tell you, you know, from having those guys is, you know, you got to let them be them. I think there's a tendency. I'm not saying you let them do whatever they want to do. You don't hold them accountable, nothing like that. But within the context of the game, if you constrict them or you put constraints on them, you can't limit them. You have to give them. You got to let them be great. That's why you have.
That's why you have him. Yeah.
Did you think he would be as good at college level as he has been?
Yeah,
you did.
Yeah, I did. And a lot, you know, his next year, I think a lot of people don't realize. I mean, we graduated 18 guys.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we were like an expansion team the next year, and you know, he was. I joked. I said the analogy I made for that team. I told him, I said, guys, last year's team, you know, rented out a club and threw a huge party. All right. Mm-hmm. And they left right when it ended. And you guys were still there. And y'all got to pay the bill for it, you know. So, you know, you have the expectation of defending champ, but you know, as a coach, like, I mean, it's almost like the year the Marlins won the World Series and then got rid of everybody the next year. Like, we were sort of the defending champ, you know. So much fell on Carson. And his first 5 games, it was a struggle. I mean, everybody was new. But the second half of the season, I mean, he drug us to the playoffs. Yeah. And he had some really good games. And, you know, we got to Seminole and we were beat up and, you know, we just couldn't stop him. But I knew his best football was way in front of him, you know, because he hadn't played much. And, you know, I looked at some similarities between him and Derrick, just the love of the game, you know, and kind of the love of the process of being. Right. I mean, Carson didn't love the weight room like Derrick did, but he loved the quarterback preparation piece. You know, no QB really loves the weight room. I don't think, you know? But that part of it, they both were very similar. And, you know, and football was all he did. You know, like, the same thing with Derrick. Like, I remember Derrick won Parade Player of the Year, and the guy calls for the interview, and he's like, well, you know, 60% of our readership is female, so we kind of take a different tact with this article. Like, the guy who won it last year played the piano, and the guy that won it 2 years before was an artist, and I was like, yeah, that's not him. I'm like,
he plays football.
Yeah, he's like, he's got a lot of tattoos. Like, his skin's worth $5,000 maybe, but, you know, he doesn't, you know. So I felt like with those intangibles and his athletic ability, you know, did I think it would go the way it's gone from at Georgia? Probably not. You know, that part of it's probably been different than I would have thought because
I think it's helped him.
I think it has.
You know what I mean? Even though, like, to be able to work with Monken, number one, and then sit behind and not have a pressure like some of these other young guys have that they get thrown in, and now he's been able to learn and really, like, you know, last year what he did is tremendous.
And I think he got to, you know, find out who he was off the field and get settled in the just kind of person he was. Right. And I think, you know, when he came to us, he had been in a small setting for so long, and then he gets into a big setting. And I think he had to kind of adjust to that. And then, you know, getting there, I think you kind of find yourself when you're 18, 19, 20, like, what do you really believe in? What are your, you know, who really are you? And, you know, and like you said, it gave him the opportunity to sit back and watch and not have to go in right away, be like, well, you know, you have no experience. You go win us a national title, you know, and if you don't, we're going to go out and try to get your replacement. But, you know, I thought maybe 22 would have been his year, but Bennett came back and I mean, that dude surprised everybody. I mean, there's not any.
Yeah.
When we went up to their coaching camp or clinic at 19 and they still had Fromm, because when he picked Georgia, I was like, it blew a shock me to no end. Like I thought he was going to Florida, and I told Brian Johnson, the quarterback's coach, he was going up on an unofficial visit. And I was like, dude, you ain't got nothing to worry about. He's not going to Georgia. Because they didn't offer him initially. They offered it. They passed on him, and I was just like, what are y'all doing? So he goes up to his visit, and his dad calls me Saturday night. They're driving back, and I could tell right when he he started talking. I was like, oh man, he's going to go to Georgia. So then I had to make the uncomfortable phone call to the coach, who I told not to worry. He was at a basketball game with a recruit, and I'm like, yeah, coach, you need to call me. Like, so that one kind of was like, sorry, but
So you wrap up at Mandarin,
right,
a couple years at Impact,
yeah,
and now you're at Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're at Jackson. Two kids
Right.
later.
right.
How are things different for you? Not just being at Jackson, but now being a father.
Way different.
Way
Like,
different.
Way
right?
different. Yeah, like I think like I think back to like how I was when I started and how I am now, and some of my former players from back then will see me and they may come to practice and watch me, and they'll be like, they'll like look at me with like disgust, like I mean, even
soft.
Henry did it. Like one of my last years at Yulee, he was back in town, and I was like, well, we'll work out tomorrow. It was in spring. He was like, I'm going anytime. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna be done at like 5 tomorrow, so I'll meet you at like 5:30. He's like, you gone soft, and I was like, what, and then other kids will come, like a guy, former players coaching for me, and they're like, yeah, Ramsay wasn't like this when he was 29 or 30 or 31, but I think you gain perspective,
Yes.
and you realize what's important and what's not, and then, with the boys, it's like maybe the time that you would have spent at the field house or time that you would have spent doing this, which I read a book about the guy who was up at St. John's in Minnesota, the Division III school, was won like 500 games or whatever. This was like 20 years ago. And in the book, we actually beat him at Trinity to go to the national championship. But there was a quote in the book that I've always remembered. And he says, the guy asked him, about his philosophy. And he said, I always ask myself with every decision I make, is this going to help us get a first down or not? And I think that's really become even more prevalent because, now it's just like, I think we worry about things. You kind of realize more and more, like, look, you can only control so much.
Yeah.
And there's only 100% of yourself to go around. And you want your sons around the program. You want your sons, but you want it to be in a good environment. But it definitely changes your perspective.
Yeah.
And it certainly, I think makes it more to where you have to budget your time better. I can't just kind of go do whatever I want to do football wise, and then not tell my wife, and then it's like, wait, you're doing what like I got to schedule that,
Right. You got to put it on the
even
schedule.
with this, like I was like, because Charlie had a swim lesson at 4:00, which he wasn't going to have this week, but I was like, I better tell her about it now. I can't just be like on Tuesday morning, hey, I'm going over to do this thing with Josh and Coach Sullivan. Like, it doesn't work that way. So it forces you to be a lot more strategic with your time, organize it better, and you got to have something left when you get home.
Right.
Like that's the thing, because when you get home is really when, that's bath and bedtime. And 4 and 2-year-olds, like that's,
right.
So where like before, for example, like a parent could have called me at 8:30 and I would have taken the phone call.
Right.
And I would have talked to him, no big deal. Now I'm like,
it
got to be after, you please, after 7:00.
Yes.
I'm no,
I'm down.
like you kind of learn to say no to those kind of things. And, again, you got to have something left in the tank when you get home. So, and on Saturdays when you're game planning, I don't know that I have till 4 or 5 o'clock, or I may want to, and you may get the look from the wife like, yeah, you don't have till 4 or 5. Like you need to get back here.
Right.
So
learn how to prioritize and use time management.
Right. And and you don't want to miss those things either. You want to be around them. So all those things, I think, I think your perspective just changes. It's not really you certainly your values don't change,
right,
but your perspective does. And the longer you do it, you realize, okay, this 12 years ago, I would go back and tell myself that's pretty silly to worry about right now. Like, you know, let that one go, or you know, swallow your pride, check your ego.
Yeah.
You probably don't need to do that. You don't need to worry about that.
Well, speaking of telling yourself, so we always close the show, and we feel like we could go on 2 more hours here with you. But we're kind of running up on it.
Right.
We always close the show with a question, every coach.
Right.
If you could go back to year 1, Coach Ramsay as a head coach, with what you know now, what would be the one thing you told yourself?
Don't take everything so personally.
Yeah.
Don't take everything so personally. I still battle that, but don't take everything so personally, and you know, learn how to prioritize what's important and what's not. You know, I think you can drive yourself crazy on this job if you try to you have to be able to delegate. You have to be able to trust people. And that would probably be the other thing I would say is, like, look, trust, put trust in people and let them, because, I think what happened early, it's like if things didn't get done, well, it's like, well, I'll just do it,
right.
Because at least I'll know it'll get done the way I want to do it or whatever. Well, you do that with enough situations, then all of a sudden, I really, realized probably halfway into my head coaching career that, you only have 100% of yourself to go around.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to take that into consideration with everybody in your program. That don't try to do too much. I think that's one thing I would say, like, don't, focus on one thing. Because a lot of times I would go to clinics and you hear all these guys talk and they have great things to say, and then you come away from it and, you like, these are our 5 core values, or these are our 6 pillars, or whatever. These are our, the 5, the thought, the hand, so you have all those things, and it may be 15 different things, and you want to go back and incorporate all those into your program, and then I'm like, and I can't get up in front of my team and remember 3 of those. So like, keep a simplistic approach. Don't try to do too much. Don't take things don't take things personally, and control what you can control.
That's awesome.
I mean, I would tell anybody, like, when you start worrying about every little thing that goes wrong, and don't try to anticipate problems best you can, but just, you got to have a problem solver's mentality, because problems are going to come up that you never would have. Like, there's going to be a problem that kind of like getting back from a camp and realizing that your lawnmower was stolen. Like, I mean, I wasn't expecting to deal with that, or getting a call from my wife asking me if I was missing anything as I'm driving a kid home. And I'm like, no, I'm not missing anything. She's like, you're missing your wallet. And then I know this because the guidance counselor at Camden County just called and said you left it there and she has it. So, and the reason that she was able to find out it was you is because she used your zoo card, because there was no, like, the woman, God bless her, like, had she not done that, I wouldn't have even known. So, then you got to turn around and drive an hour back to Camden County to get, so when those things happen, you just all right, just as the problems come along, just
roll with it.
Just roll with it.
Handle it. Figure it out.
Just figure it out.
Awesome.
Like, if you freak out at every little thing that goes wrong, that you're not going to solve the problem. You're probably going to make it worse. And then everybody's kind of looking at you. Not with the wallet situation, that was all on me, but like, because if you panic, they're gonna panic.
Yeah.
So
Well, Coach, we got to wrap it up. Brent will find us if we go over an hour.
Over time. Appreciate you having
We
me.
appreciate you having
I
so much.
enjoyed it, man. It was great
awesome.
talk. I love talking about those times, and brings back a lot of great memories. And you guys do so much for the game in the area and have done so much games for the game. So anytime, anything I can do to come down and talk, I love it.
Appreciate you, man.
No problem.
Have a great one. Good luck this season.
Yes, sir.